Okay, so good morning and welcome to what is More ClearComm's first webinar of 2024. This might be the last time that I say this, but Happy New Year. Welcome to today's session. And if you've joined us before on the webinars that we've run from August of last year, thank you. Your support is so important to making sure that these webinars add value and give what we think is a different perspective on the world of data privacy and cybersecurity. Hopefully, today's session will be no different. We're going to be talking about the human firewall, your people, and your role. And this is one of my particular favorite subjects in the field of cybersecurity because it focuses very much on the human element and on you and your people, your employees, and your stakeholders, and how we all play a part in keeping organizations safe and secure. So today's session, we're going to focus on some key subject areas such as human science and cybercrime and why they are intrinsically linked. We're going to talk about social engineering and what that means and how it manifests in the modern day. We're going to talk about trust and vulnerability, which are not it's not potentially a phrase that you'd expect to hear in a cybersecurity related webinar, but it's very important, as is employee engagement. And then we're going to talk at the end about how you actually go about building a human firewall before we open the floor to questions. And I'm joined today by two fantastic panelists, Bob Harper from Agendali and Shah from the More ClearComm team. Good morning to you both. Bob, would you just like to kick us off with a very short intro about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi. As Rich said, my name is Bob Harper. I'm a co-founder of Agendali, which is a meeting management tool specifically for accountants. Yeah, I'm here to help in any way I can, Rich, with all of those topics today.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and I'm sure your insights will be really important, especially when we talk about trust and employee engagement. So yeah, thank you. You're very welcome. Paris, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Rich. So, as Richard said, I'm one of the cybersecurity consultants here at More ClearComm, and I lead up a lot of the technical engagements that we have for social engineering and phishing, and I'll also be discussing a lot of the threats that are against your businesses and potential people, even in personal life and the topics you can see here. So yeah, it's quite a lot we'll be talking about in terms of human psychology against cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I know that I'm going to invite you to draw on your personal experiences, Paris, in terms of um, something called red teaming, which we'll talk about in a bit more depth. And you have great experience and insight there. Um, Three important facts I think to keep in mind for all of us today. That's the panel and all of you as guests about employee awareness, and it's something that we've talked about a bit as a team this week, in fact. So these are three comments that a guy called Perry Carpenter, who's the chief strategy officer at Know Before. I'll ask Paris briefly in a second to give us a very brief explanation of what Know Before is and what they do. But it's very important, I think, because we're talking about people. So he made 3 points from the perspective of an employee. Uh, One, just because I'm aware does not mean that I care, and that's a really important um, perspective, I think, because we talk a lot about raising awareness of data privacy and cybersecurity, and maybe we're all guilty of making some assumptions that that means that once we help employees to understand something, that everything will suddenly improve. That isn't necessarily the case. If you try and work against human nature, you'll fail. I think that's a really powerful statement. And finally, what employees do is more important than what they know, which kind of links with point one. It's awareness does not necessarily change behavior. Paris, you just okay to just explain briefly what Know Before is so we can get a better understanding of Perry's perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Know Before are one of many companies that provide a managed service to a lot of businesses, small to medium, or actually even large businesses, where they can efficiently test the awareness of employees and staff. And that's against a lot of factors, not only just cybersecurity, they also look at data protection, physical security as well, and general data hygiene as well. So there are a
Yeah,
lot of modules that they can push, and there are a lot of companies out there that do this. Know Before are one
yeah,
of the leaders in the industry,
yeah,
and generally it
yeah.
goes
Thank you.
hand in hand with training that's provided to
Mm,
within companies. So once training and awareness has been done, it's good to test this awareness. And as you've pointed out, just because they're aware doesn't mean that they'll care. So of course that needs to be tested and regularly enforced.
Thanks, Paris. Yeah, and as we said, there's multiple companies that do the same thing. I just think it really struck me that a chap who's in charge of their strategy is so conscious of the employee balance. So yeah, I think that's really important. So we'll kick off looking at human science and cybercrime, and with a very simple graphic. So taken from multiple sources of research last year, this is what causes human beings and your employees. These are the things that they might do inside your organization that would directly cause or facilitate a breach of data or a cyber attack. And
Yeah.
this is quite common. So I mean, Paris has great experience of this. Not so common that you see a malicious individual within your organization that's deliberately doing harm, but very common to see things like employee error, a lost or stolen device, of which, as Paris knows, and we'll hopefully comment on in a set, there's ways to kind of mitigate the damage if that happens. But then there's criminal attack, cyber attack, which predominantly is actually facilitated by people anyway through phishing and social engineering, which we'll talk about in more depth. But yeah, so Paris, your sort of first thoughts on these numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there are several vectors for a cyber attack or a data breach, and what we can say is quite comfortably in the industry, 98% of these attacks happen from social engineering, which is using the human vector, not just simply because they've looked at your technical infrastructure and they've attacked your networks. It's usually from the human side of things. I'm sure you've heard of the recent attacks in Las Vegas on is it MGM Hotel? I can't remember the hotel.
Yeah.
And that, again, such a large organization, it was due to social engineering where they've just phished users internally and managed to gain access. So that's one way where this criminal attack using the human vector. The malicious insider is generally disgruntled employees. It could be somebody that's not happy with their position or they've recently left. If you don't have appropriate processes in place to ensure that that threat can't be mitigated should it arise, then it's quite easy to overlook it, especially someone who has authoritative access, administrative access within the organization. Employee error can be, general misconfigurations, technical misconfigurations, can be errors in sending data to the wrong people. So an example would be, we've seen quite a few of these recently where clients have sent CC'd all or BCC all, and data has been sent out to more people than it was supposed to. Another one's lost or stolen devices. If your devices aren't encrypted and they're lost or stolen, it doesn't stop someone just having a poke around. That's playing on the normal curiosity of people. If we see something, we might want to open it or pick it up. So that's quite a major, and that all of these are quite easily mitigated at the basic level.
That was my next question. Yeah, is the beauty of everything we're talking about today is if we make the kind of assumption that awareness and behaviors can change, that means that all of these stats in theory could be improved, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much you can do on a technical level, and then beyond that, it's really culture and awareness, and I'm going to touch on this lots of times, and caring. Really, it's about having that vigilance around not just the threats, but vigilance around the assets and the processes that you own, within a business and in your personal lives, and all links together really. So it's fine if you might be aware there's some threats, but you do have to care that these threats are quite real, and what steps are you taking to make sure that you keep vigilance of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next slide kind of reinforces that. And I'll invite you both to comment but as as Paris said, we see that sort of 90% plus of attacks starting through email. Email is a really, really sort of vulnerable front door. We know that social engineering, which we'll talk about in more depth, that it uses lures such as entertainment, social reward, or recognition, plays very much in our emotions. Again, reinforcing what Paris has highlighted, we only see about 3% of malware exploiting technical IT flaws. It's very much predominantly about social engineering, which means it's your people that are they're kind of trying to get through. Phishing, very much the most likely attack. We see a lot of comment through our peers as well, actually, in the cybersecurity community, talking about employees being your weakest link. I don't think they necessarily are. But they are the most likely point of attack, and they do represent the greatest opportunity to reduce your risks, don't they, Paris? I think.
Absolutely. I think the attack surface is much larger on the human side. As you said, it's not the weakest link, but the surface is so large that organizations struggle to contain that and secure that appropriately.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, doesn't it, that if nearly all attacks are trying to get through your people, then it would be easy to assume that people are the weakest link. But actually, like you said, it's the attack surface. It's because most attacks are on people.
Absolutely.
That's where things are going to
And
manifest.
it's context dependent. So, if you have an organization with a large number of technical people, so you would assume that they would have more knowledge and awareness around cybersecurity. But if you have, on the other side, if you have a large organization who don't have technical knowledge, then it's the organization's responsibility to make sure that they have enough awareness to mitigate these risks.
Yeah. Bobby, have you experienced a phishing attack? Have you received a phishing email, and is it something that happens often, or?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I get the odd email that comes through, but touch wood so far.
Yeah.
I've dealt with them appropriately. I was just thinking as you were talking there about the weakest link. I don't think people are the weakest link. I think it's leadership and management are the weakest link.
Right. Okay.
Because they set the culture.
Mm.
It's not, let's not blame the team, the employees. Let's sort of look in the mirror.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I know we've talked a lot in previous webinars and personally about everything starts from the top, doesn't it? And that's kind of how things play out. So obviously I'm asking this question from a technical perspective, but definitely Bob, contribute as well, because I think it applies. Is from our perspective, how significant is the human factor within cybersecurity per se? So not just talking about phishing, but the element of kind of helping people to understand, and because we're dealing with people, how easy is it to address?
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of risks around this, and as I said earlier, there's a couple of areas which present how significant the risk is. So one of those would be lack of awareness, another would be complexity of technology, and also the culture, as Bob touched on, earlier. So if that awareness is not there and the security culture is not there, then of course it's going to be quite difficult, and the threats would increase significantly. How easy is it to address this? As you said, know before is an option. So companies like that which can provide training and testing, improving the security culture within the business. So creating a non-fearful culture of reporting things. I think we touched on this on previous webinars as well, where employees shouldn't feel afraid to point things out or challenge things. If there's an email that's come from a senior member of staff, there's nothing wrong in challenging that via a different method, and there shouldn't be any repercussions if that challenge was found to be not appropriate. Another one would be insider threats, which we touched on as well. Again, easy to address. If you have processes in place to revoke access to people when they leave, ensure access is not only given to one person, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Critical data is not being, the key is not being held by one person only. That's a couple of responses.
Yeah, a lot of this is, as you're talking, I'm thinking this is so much about human psychology, isn't it? And going back to what we said at the start about awareness, being aware doesn't mean that you care. Bob, I think we were on a webinar before Christmas talking about risk, weren't we? And the human propensity to take risks. And we're all aware of things being a bad idea, but we still do them. There are still people that drink and drive. There are still people that drive without a seatbelt. There's still people that we do. The society does things on a daily basis, even though we know it's a bad idea. So we do need to make that next step beyond awareness to actually behavior change, don't we?
Yeah, I think the second one, how easy is it to address? Like I just alluded to earlier, is if you're trying to address the wrong thing, it's really difficult. So if you're looking at employees and actually it's a culture issue, it's a leadership and management issue, it's really difficult to address. So the first thing is really to understand what does need to be addressed. And if culture is the key thing, then that's not easy, but it's doable. And it's about improvement, maybe not perfection. And it's an ongoing effort to improve culture from the moment somebody, well, even before someone joins your company, in the way that you advertise, the way that you treat people through that onboarding process, the way you train, develop, and manage and lead people. It's constant, but it can be done. And yeah, the steps are pretty easy, but it's pretty simple, but not easy.
Yeah. There's a difference, isn't there, between sort of ticking boxes to make sure that everyone in your business knows X, Y, or Z, whatever it is you want to share with them. But it's a whole different ball game, isn't it, in terms of, as you said, Bob, culture change and driving behavioural change. And I know that, Paris, that's something we do with our phishing simulation work with clients, isn't it? We don't just measure how many people in the company are going to click a phishing link. We actually do help them to address that.
Yeah. I mean, we're creatures of habit, right? So as Bob said, if those habits are not instilled from the outset, from the beginning, from the onboarding process, we're very unlikely to change drastically should any of these risks arise later down the road. So we are resistant to change, but if these changes are made habitually within the organization, then they will happen and the culture will change.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, which neatly takes us into social engineering. Fascinating subject. We are, as Paris just said, we are creatures of habit. Cyber criminals know this. They employ the services of psychologists, marketing experts, behavioral scientists. They know exactly how predictable we are, as much as we'd like to think that we're not. IBM gives some really good definitions of social engineering. It is often referred to as human hacking, which is quite a good phrase, to be honest. Essentially, social engineering, in whatever form it takes, is designed to manipulate us into sharing information that we shouldn't share, or to download software that we shouldn't download, visit sites we shouldn't visit, send money to criminals, or just make any other mistakes that compromise our personal security and situations, or the organizational security. And it just exploits the innate sort of weaknesses of us as human beings, and the fact that we, as we're going to move on to in a bit more depth further down the line in today's session, the fact that we are so easily giving our trust based on signals that we might see or hear or experience that make us feel we can trust something. So it's much more about the manipulation of people than it is technical or system vulnerabilities. And for the most part, and this is one of Paris's sort of fields that he works in a lot for more ClearComm, it takes the form of phishing. So Paris, are you okay to talk us through this slide? And we don't need to go through the bullets as such, but just to, what is phishing? What forms does it take?
Yeah. So, I mean, phishing has many forms. It's not simply, as we all know, is receiving emails or from a print somewhere on the other side of the world requesting for money. I'm sure that's one of the common phishing themes everyone remembers. There are lots of ways where It could be by phone call, by SMS as well. I'm sure a lot of people have been receiving text messages in quite recently, and I know I know family members that have received texts posing as other family members, playing on the common psychological factors of urgency, desperacy, fear. So where they're requesting, that they're in trouble, please contact me, and it's usually a request for money. You'll have such messages on WhatsApp as well. Another one's phone calls. So a common threat that's been going around is people give you a call acting as IT providers or from Microsoft, saying you have a virus on your computer or something of the sort, and they'll request you to click some links and such. So either they will lock your computer and that will lead to ransomware, trying to extort some money from you, or it would just be purely to get you to pay for their services. So those are all quite low level threats, but and usually are not targeted, they're just opportunistic. Somebody clicks on it, but then you have the targeted end where they're quite sophisticated. They will create the whole identity and pretext based on your organization or your person, and they will send you an email trying to pose as a senior member of staff, like I said earlier, and it will be quite believable, and that's what we do when we do simulated phishing. We will make some phishing attempts that are quite absurd and should be picked up quite easily. And then on the other hand, they'll be quite advanced and very, 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 very believable. And that awareness training should prompt you on how to look for these things. If it's too good to be true, for example, then what you need to look for, who you need to contact. And, if it's asking for something quite critical, to change account details, to send money to someone, invoicing, is usually these are targeted to high risk individuals. So someone in finance, somebody in IT, to click a link, add credentials. So of course,
sorry, I spoke over you. Apologies. Are we seeing that the nature of the threat is evolving, Paris, and therefore how do we? I'm thinking, if a company had phishing awareness training or phishing simulation exercises 2 years ago, that's quite a long time, isn't it, in terms of how quickly these kind of attacks are evolving?
I think the attack vector doesn't change. It's just the sophistication of how they play on the psychology. So now, a lot of people have spoken about how AI has helped change the phishing game now, where, they're able to use AI to formulate very advanced text. In the past, you'll see a lot of spelling mistakes because, these will be coming from other parts of the world where they're not technically advanced hackers, as we would want to say, or criminal enterprises. They're simply people who've managed to buy an off-the-shelf product on the dark web, and they're just pushing out these phishing emails, and however they get lucky. So again, they don't need to have massive technical knowledge, and AI has helped push that to an advanced level where they're much more believable. And so what was the other point you touched on, Rich?
Just whether for organizations that whether they're supported by more ClearComm or investing in phishing support from elsewhere, does it mean that the kind of training needs to be more regular? Is it something that can be done less often?
So it two things go hand in hand. It's the non-technical and technical control. So, if an organization has really good training and awareness program, we come in, we do the testing, and they implement a training program based on that. But if they haven't got those technical controls as well, so it's a two-pronged defense, really. So again, attackers can circumvent technical controls and can circumvent the non-technical. It's both have to go hand in hand and stay consistent. So as the sophistication of attacks improve and change, the technical side needs to improve, and so does the training and awareness. And that probably the awareness side needs to stay consistent, because that changes the methodology of these attacks changes far quicker than the technical vulnerabilities that are out there. So if you have new joiners in your team, how do you make sure those new joiners are safe, rather than the existing staff? So they will have a slightly different threat applied to them, then staff who have been there for a few years are part of the culture already, so you might need to do extra training for new staff, whereas existing staff need to be kept up to date.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That all makes total sense. Um, so I mean, we've covered some of this already, but it'd be interesting to have a thought, and this definitely plays on the people culture side of things, which I know Bob has great awareness of. Um, Helping individual employees to understand the key role they play. And Paris, I think you touched on that then. Really, it's a lot to do with induction, isn't it, and how we onboard people. But if we acknowledge that human nature is our greatest weakness, can that fight ever be won? Which is quite a question, I suppose. But yeah, how do we combat this sort of stuff? And Paris, maybe sort of some experiences you've had working with individuals as well would be good.
Yeah. So in terms of how we can combat human weakness, it's when we've done a couple of engagements in the past, it's simply playing on human nature where they're friendly. They'll be happy to help you. If you
Yeah.
look like you belong. We've walked into a couple of organizations where we've just requested we're supposed to be here to do some testing, and they were happy to help us and give us all the credentials needed and access needed. So it's a bit unfair because you are playing on this intrinsic intrinsic kind of nature that we have.
Yeah.
We want to help people. We want to feel like we've done something good in the day. But of course, are you being vigilant in the course of that? So can the fight ever be won? It can. It just depends. It goes back to what Bob has said. If senior leadership has created the processes. So an example would be in our situation, if we entered the building and they had a visitors access policy, had the process in place to say any visitors that come in need to be verified as to what they're there to do, X, Y, and Z,
Mm.
then that could have been mitigated quite easily. They
Yeah.
would have done the verification checks to say, are these people supposed to be here? No. Okay, well, can you please leave the building, or
Yeah.
and take appropriate actions after that. So
Yeah. You make a good point, don't you? Because if we think about, as human beings, the kind of experiences that we're absorbing throughout the course of a day, by the time we go into work at 9 a.m., we might have already had a pretty horrible morning with sort of getting the kids to school or the traffic, etc. And let's face it, it's a lot easier to smile and wave someone by in the scenario that you explained,
yeah,
um, compared to challenging them about whether they should be in that building. And we haven't got a psychologist on today's webinar, obviously, but I imagine that physiologically it feels good to be helpful, and
absolutely.
it's uncomfortable to
Yeah,
say
yeah.
who are you and should you be here. So in
And
that sense, I guess it's the organization's responsibility, Bob, isn't it, in terms of the culture and leadership, to take away that responsibility a bit and put things in place.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the first question there. I got a couple of thoughts. I mentioned one already about how you on board, how you interview, the questions you ask at the interview. You're talking
Yeah.
about propensity to risk. Think about what questions you can ask an employee. So one of the businesses I work with has a core value of we care, and the question is, well, what behaviour have you shown where you demonstrated you truly care?
Yeah.
And if somebody can't answer that question, then are they really a deeply caring person? And because when you're bringing them into the business, you want them to care on a daily basis about different things. But cyber is one of the things that you want them to care about. So they got to be sometimes problem can be solved by not creating the problem, by not bringing in the wrong people.
Yeah.
But another little tool that I think is really useful is something called the position agreement, which is a 1-2 page document that the manager and the person being managed collaborate on together. So it's not a contract of employment. It's after that when they
Yeah.
come into the organization, and that can help someone really understand what their specific standards and actions are in their role and company wide as well. And that leads into much more regular performance reviews, getting away from the annual performance review, which is really a dead duck now, and being much more agile. And you depending on who it is and what's going on, that could be weekly conversations, but definitely monthly, and with quarterly reviews. And then the other thing I just jotted down really is helping employees. So it's in conversations, one-to-one and team meetings, and sharing stories. In this conversation, there's stories being told, anecdotes. People walking into the office. I remember when I walked into the office and you just gave me access. It's a story, and stories work with humans really well.
Absolutely. I think it's important to talk about the business impact, right? And impact to personal life as well, in these situations. So we, as you said, it's easy for us to sit there and sit through an awareness slide. Most people will probably even skip through it to the end just to say that they've got that checkbox, But if they know the impact that these threats do give us, rather than just knowing that these threats exist, it could be an impact to. I mean, we've had a example would be from the previous webinar. We spoke about this, where a member of staff had their email compromised, and the attacker had actually changed their account details with HR. So nobody was aware that had happened. But 2-3 months down the line, the member of staff couldn't see that their salary was being paid, and of course, went back. So of course that can have an impact to staff's personal lives as well, not just the organization as well. So yeah, I think that's.
But we're definitely sort of talking now about the impact of comparing an organization that puts its employees through training, whether it's about cybersecurity or anything else, as an attempt to add value and improve, as opposed to those which do it as that tick box exercise because we have to do it. And that's the kind of the demarcation for me. It's doing something because it's the right thing, or doing it because we have to. And we should do. So so thank you very much. So we're going to talk about trust and vulnerability, and this is where it gets a little bit into the psychology, and again, I love this subject, and I think it's so important to understand this in a broader business sense, as well as from a cybersecurity perspective. So social engineering, which we've talked about, phishing, etc., all relies on one key factor, and that's trust. And we're programmed to trust from a young age. And I know we've had previous guests on the webinars, Mike Clark, who is an expert in emotional intelligence and how this trust is formed. And the psychologist Erik Erikson said that if a child successfully develops trust, they will feel safe and secure in the world. Now, he wasn't talking about that in respect of cybersecurity, but as someone in that field, what I take from that is that depending on how you develop from that infant type stage of your life, you probably carry that sort of trusting nature and the safety and security feeling into adult life, and in theory then you would take it into the workplace. So children who learn to trust their caregivers in infancy will be more likely to form trusting relationships with others. One could argue without any evidence that might have a direct link to the likelihood that in a social engineering scenario, they would be more likely to be susceptible to that. Cyber criminals absolutely use this to their advantage. Another really great quote, which I love, and I've used this before, from BJ Fogg. Now, this is 3 truths about human nature. And apologies to anybody on today's session who feels that they don't fall into these categories. This is very general. We are lazy. We're creatures of habit, as Paris mentioned earlier in the webinar. And we are social. And I think everyone would agree with that, as human beings are social animals. All of those factors together play into the hands of cyber criminals. So guys, I'd be interested in, Paris, you've already mentioned about being creatures of habit. Be interested to know, how does that relate to risk and cybersecurity in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the laziness, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, generally, people don't have time for additional things in their day, right? They have their schedule, they have their routine, as we say. You wake up, go to work, you do your thing during the day, and it's usually at this point where there's an interjection of the attacker or the phishing email, you might know what a phishing email looks like, but and I'll be very honest, we've all fallen for it, me too, where I've opened an email and saw this looks like a normal thing, let me just click through it, and then later on you realize, oh wait, actually this is not right. But it's because our brain takes over and we're always on autopilot generally. We're not always in this active thinking mindset unless we're doing something different from our normal routine. But you also have to think about social engineering is all around us. It's not only used for negative purposes, for criminal purposes. You go to the shopping supermarket, there's social engineering there. The way they've put the tiles on the floor and how the sound of the trolley on the tiles, in lines where they want you to go faster, the gaps are smaller. They'll put things that you want to buy closer to the checkout. So it's all around us, the way cars are designed, the way streets are designed. So again, you can't protect yourself against social engineering. It's the potential threats that can come of social engineering that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, the laziness of it always interests me because no one likes to think of themselves as lazy, but we all take shortcuts through the course of every day. And when you talk about habit there, Paris, I think we've talked on a previous webinar about heuristic thinking and critical thinking.
Mhm.
Heuristic is basically, as Paris said, then when we're on autopilot and we're navigating the world without necessarily being fully conscious of the minor sort of iterative decisions we take during the course of each day. So switching on that critical thinking is not easy. And the social side of it, I mean, we are, we're more connected as a society than we've ever been. But that's never going to go the other way, is it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'll speak about some examples in later down, but where all three of these are probably touched on, in terms of exploiting vulnerability. These are vulnerabilities. If you look at them, on the human vector side, if you're lazy, you're not going to do anything extra to do that. So if I send you an email, can you please make this urgent, make it quick? You'll try the easiest and quickest way to just get it done and out of your way.
Is it fair to say that the individual that is extremely lazy, habitual, and socially connected is probably the highest risk?
Most likely, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, it can go both ways, I think, actually, because one who's too aware might look past, then it will cause issues in other areas, might look past the ones that are very sophisticated, where you become conditioned to this, well, I'll only look for the ones that are only playing on the vulnerabilities that present for lazy people or habitual things, so it can go both ways. But yes, I think on a high level, these three are most common in our society. They will.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah. I think the one thing that BJ Fogg doesn't touch on, which definitely kind of knits into this, is when we're fatigued and when we're tired, we make probably poorer decisions. But that's But generally, these are the three sort of factors. So so red teams. As I said at the beginning, this is something that Paris gets involved for us at More ClearComm significantly as part of our core activity. So I'll hand over to Paris at this point to talk through this slide, and as you go, Paris, please give some examples of what you've experienced.
Yeah, so red teaming's a penetration testing concept that emerged in the early 1960s, where basic penetration testing was only looking at your technical services. So you'll be looking at your websites, your web applications, your networks and such. But red teaming is based on achieving an objective and testing your processes, your internal policies and procedures, and any technical controls you have. I come from a physical security background, so that also plays a large part there, where physical security was quite paramount before everything moved to the cloud. I mean, a lot of people still see physical security as an importance, or some people don't actually see that anymore because they think, well, who's going to come into the office? But there's still a risk there, which I'll talk about a couple of engagements where where that has, you know, we've seen all vectors where social engineering was used, physical security, network security as well. So there's technical red teaming where we look at the logical side. So again, we're looking at your networks, your digital footprint, so how we can access your assets from a technical perspective. And the objective would be to either attain access to critical data, critical systems, or information, confidential, sensitive information. And then physical red teaming will be looking at entering your premises or your critical storage areas by using tools or social engineering. And that again, the objective is to simulate an attacker in the real world scenario. A penetration test traditionally won't be simulating an attack because we will have knowledge of what your systems look like, what your physical controls look like. But a red team is generally, we're not provided with much information. So we're looking at the organization or the target purely in the attacker's eyes, which is beneficial to a lot of organizations. As you know, a pen test, we might not look at it with an attacker's eyes, so you won't be able to gauge what your first level of your first threat surface looks like, and then of course it progresses down the line. So a couple of
I mean, it's fair to, sorry, Paris. I mean, fair to say that we quite often would carry this out in conjunction with remote testing activities as well. It would kind of
absolutely
kind of a dual approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I'll talk about now in terms of examples. So red teaming will have all the attack vectors I spoke about earlier. So we'll be looking at social engineering, which will include phishing, you know, looking at phone calls, SMS, or emails. And then we're looking at physical security to access if you have a physical office area, or you know, a place where we could physically get hands on any logical assets as laptops or access to your networks. And then we're also looking at your external networks, your websites, your web applications, and your internal network, which is within your office spaces or data centers and such. So an example would be of a recent red team engagement we've done where all of those vectors were to be tested. So they had 2 offices, and what we were tasked to do is to gain entry and at the very least gain access to their systems. And I'll quickly run through it. So on a technical perspective, externally, we weren't able to find anything. So again, it goes back to what we said earlier. Technical controls are usually up to scratch on the external perimeter, and then we'll look at the human side of things. And this is where we were able to gain access, where a simple phone call using just normal pretexting, posing as IT assistant from IT support staff from their organization, requesting them to visit a link. And that link took them to a malicious website, which we were hosting, and that proceeded them to give us credentials and also circumvent multi-factor authentication, which was actually brought around to as a technical control to prevent phishing attempts. But this is what we were talking about earlier. You know, it has advanced so much that even those controls can be circumvented with the right expertise. So from that point, we were able to get credentials and we had access to their systems as a normal user. And then we went to their offices and we were able to gain access. We simply just walked in and said, we're here to do some testing. We were given ID badges, visitors badges without any contest. We did get challenged at one of the offices, but again, you know, we had access by that point, and we had access to critical infrastructure within the organization. So you know, it doesn't stop us from leaving any malicious software or malicious testing equipment there and leaving thereafter. So those are a couple of examples where, you know, we've taken it from the human side and gone all the way to the logical side, where we have access to critical assets, access to sensitive areas of the business as well.
Yeah. And that's and these examples that Paris are giving, they're not extreme, are they, Paris? These are
No.
this will be fairly common.
This would be fairly low level risk, which an organization can mitigate just looking at their processes. It's not sophisticated. We didn't use any incredibly advanced tactics. It was simply just dressed as a normal person walking into the offices or calling someone. It's not, we're not using elaborate stories to tell. What we don't want to do in testing is do that. Unless the business demands that kind of threat. A normal threat would be just opportunistic attackers or targeted attackers for financial departments and such.
Yeah, so all of those potential barriers were kind of open to Paris and our colleagues because of human nature, really. So, and so we're going to talk about employee engagement and driving secure behaviours. And Bob, I know from experience of working with you on various projects, and in a team together, this is where culture comes in, isn't it? This is how we develop strong cultures, right behaviors. So are you okay to sort of, we won't go through the Utrecht University definition in depth or the McLeod review here, but these will all be very familiar phrases and language to you, won't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, my sort of maybe more down to earth language is it's about getting that discretionary effort. So people, they don't just turn up like in this automatic pilot mode, sit down, clock in, do their work, not really think, and then go home. They're much more switched on and engaged. They are, and that's a massive issue worldwide. Lack of employee engagement. And it's hurting the business. They're hurting businesses financially as well as in risk.
Yeah. Do you think there's like and sort of, with what the whole purpose of today's session is to talk about how we can help organizations to engage their employees in order to reduce their cyber risk. And so what what Utrecht and McLeod are kind of saying here is that there are some sort of tangible actions and steps that need to be taken. And I'm guessing sort of, and from our experience talking together, the high majority of organizations wouldn't understand that these are important factors in a successful operation.
Yeah, I think many business owners and leaders, certainly business owners, maybe more than leaders who are not owners, assume that their employees are going to care as much as they do, and they just don't. It's not their business. They don't care as much as you. So
No.
it's like understanding the reality of the situation. Why would they care? You've got to make them care. And that's done, in my opinion, with linking someone's role and their activities to some non-financial purpose, a purpose that the business is trying to make a difference in the world, a positive difference in the world. I don't know whether now's time to sort of go into this, but the
Absolutely.
example, they were actually on television. It's a business that I've been tracking for many years. They were actually featured in The Factory, or I think that was the name of the program, this week or last week. A jeans company in North Wales, and their jeans are expensive, by the way, but their business is set up not to make money through selling jeans. Their business is set up to get 400 people their jobs back in Cardigan, because about 20 years ago, that whole town was really based around jeans manufacturing, and I think it was Marks and Spencers, but they shipped it offshore to a lower cost base, and 400 people lost their jobs in a town of 4,000. And it had a massive impact. So yeah, that they're engaged because they've got something meaningful that's meaningful to them that they can buy into. So that's for me where employee engagement starts. And many businesses lack that purpose, or they've got it, but they may not have articulated it. And there's a reason for being. The business is making meaning in the world.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of organizations make a range of assumptions that this stuff just happens when actually behavior has to be driven?
Yeah, I just don't think. I mean, I speak mainly with business owners. Just don't think they quite get that they think differently to employees.
Yeah.
And they sort of they think, well, we go a pay rise then, or sort of we pay them more, their performance will increase, and it won't. Well, it might do for a short period of time, but that's not the answer. It's engaging people, as human beings, inspiring them rather than trying to motivate them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Bob, I'm
Absolutely.
sure you'll have some. You could probably, I don't know what you think about this, but I feel employees also want some ownership of the role that they're doing, right? So, if they don't feel like they own a process or something within the business and that they play a key part in it, rather than just being someone that's paid to behave in a certain way, it does change the culture quite a lot. If that ownership factor is not there.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you're talking about business processes. Well, let the people that run the process develop the process,
Hmm.
and have process owners. Um, and again, people will develop a great process when they're doing it, when they're inspired and they know that that's achieving a bigger and better outcome for
Yeah.
the world, not just for them earning a bit of money, paying their
Yeah.
mortgage. And that comes to good leadership, not micromanaging people,
Hmm.
coaching,
Yeah.
supporting, inspiring, and then sharing those stories and building that team that are achieving something together.
Yeah, and I think this is, for me, this is the sort of next step beyond training and awareness. Definitely, it's when we have to kind of get a little bit more self-aware and self-critical as an organization, and realistic about, how can we really affect improvements and change, and all of which is building towards, building a human firewall. And Bob, obviously, this is very much, I'm sort of conscious we have about 8 minutes for the session at this point, but how important are conversations and meetings as a tool for building that engagement, Bob?
Well, I wouldn't have built a piece of software if I didn't think it was important.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
software, it supports it. What the software does is supports best practice. So it's really the practice, it's the behavior. It's not the software as such. It's an enabler. But yeah, conversations. Conversations are key. Conversations we say is where the magic happens. It's where
Yeah.
transformation uh, takes place. One-to-one conversations where you're intimate with somebody and you can align someone's personal goals, their desires, their personal drivers to the businesses. So when somebody wants to help their kids get on the housing ladder, and you can link that to their behavior at work and making sure the workplace is safe and not attacked, or they're doing these particular behaviors that are driving sales or driving operational improvements or creating the better finance function. They're going to be more engaged, and that comes from conversations on a one-to-one level, and then bringing people together as a team and recognizing the right behavior. So when somebody has shown that they've cared, by saying, look, we've got this email, what do you think? Or I've got this text message, or stopping someone getting access to the building because they haven't identified themselves. Whatever the behavior is that demonstrates that they've cared enough, then that,
Yeah.
that is shared as I call them core value stories, in meetings. So we
Yeah.
create this narrative of values of culture,
Yeah.
because I said to you, I think in an email that we exchanged, it's like brushing teeth. It's got
Mm.
to be done every day, preferably more than once.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing battle,
Yeah.
and
I
it's
mean,
little and often.
yeah, it's interesting, and I'm thinking so much as you're speaking. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say I'm 52 now, so I've been working in a variety of businesses and sectors for over 30 years, and in my experience, I guess this is human nature. Um, Poor behavior is generally acknowledged, more likely to be acknowledged than good behavior. Would you say that's still true?
Yeah, and we need to recognize good behavior 5 times more than bad behavior.
Mm.
Bad behavior is recognized, one-to-one meetings. Good behavior in front of everybody.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah, we
think
are.
that goes back to a lot of one of the slides you mentioned, children, are
Yeah.
habitual. And you can see that when we reward children, on their good behavior, you can see an increase in terms of their engagement and how they progress. So that's instilled in us naturally, but it doesn't happen as much anymore, of course.
We
Yeah, that's
are
so true.
essentially big kids, Richard, aren't we? And
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think we
Yeah.
all like, to receive a happy birthday on Facebook or a like. It's we're
Mm,
quite simple animals. I think thinking it can help sometimes to think of ourselves as animals that operate in a certain way, like you say, deal with reality,
mm.
and you've got much more chance of getting the outcome that you're after.
Yeah, and I think accidentally we've managed to answer that second question about the common mistake. So I'm happy to move on and think about how we can build a human firewall. So just a very simple visual representation of what a human firewall is. If we think about our organization, and there's that sort of circle of individuals, which would be employees in a very flat structure from the CEO to the newest joiner, the most junior person in the organization, forming a circle and a barrier around that organization, a human barrier to protect it from a cybersecurity perspective. And essentially, it's a commitment of those employees, of everyone, to follow best practice and to do our very best to prevent and report, which is very important. And Paris, I'm sure, will have a view on the fact that the reporting of incidents, whether they turn out to be real or not, is so important. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and so what we're talking about is it's about the important factors here for building a human firewall are that structured education for people. So even though we've said that awareness alone isn't important, we still do have to focus on the education, um, and awareness on cyber threats and privacy risks. Works like a technical firewall, which I'll ask Paris to give us a 10-second explanation of what a technical firewall is briefly. And it's basically designed to block outside threats, create a barrier, mutual trust, so important, and the shared goal, which is to protect the organization.
Yeah, I think you already answered the question there, Rich. It's to just block outside threats. So
Yeah.
it's your gatekeeper to a technical firewall will be the gatekeeper to your assets, your technical assets, your networks. So rudimentarily, it's allowing traffic to come in and go out, and you can create rules that will specify which traffic is allowed to come through and which traffic is allowed to go out. So in the same sense, the human firewall should be the same. You're controlling which information goes out and comes in, and which interactions you enable or prevent.
Yeah, yeah. So just to be clear, so the phrase "human firewall" is not something that has been created or made up by more ClearComm. This is a phrase which has been in circulation for a while now, because the cybersecurity community has gradually acknowledged that the part that people play, and it's the human version of a technical firewall, which will be something that your IT team would set up, I'm guessing, Paris, in terms of
Yeah, yeah.
protecting technically.
Yeah, and it's something we all have in our homes. I mean, if you have a router provided by an IT internet service provider, it generally will have a firewall in it. Be it basic, and might be something you can't configure, but in organizations, you will have something a little bit more advanced where you have more granular controls of what rule sets you can put in place.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that graphic there, the people around the organization, is definitely something to take away from today and have in our minds. That's what we're trying to achieve and help you all achieve. And within the human firewall, very quickly, that there's 5 building blocks. Basically, it's about cybersecurity, about a culture which starts at the top and has to be lived and breathed by the leadership team. Not just something that they try to implement and ask everybody else to do, but then they don't live by that standard themselves. We need to encourage employees to care about cybersecurity, build that constant awareness and knowledge, encourage our employees to challenge and question. Really important that if your organization is in a position where someone on their second or third day feels confident enough to challenge a senior manager on something they've seen or received, from a respect of, was it an email from you, or is that potentially a fraudulent email, that's a good place to be. And measure and monitor, and in every, it's impossible to improve if you're not measuring and monitoring progress. So just looking at that asterisk on number 3, building constant awareness and knowledge, awareness alone doesn't drive change, and knowledge is not the same as behavior. And they're really, really key takeaways from today, I think. Any sort of final thoughts there, guys, on what we have on the screen now?
I got two. One
Yeah.
of the panelists has said that Hyatt Denham isn't in North Wales, it's West Wales, so apologies for that. I'll just
Okay.
look on the map to double check. Oh, there's an argument on that one. But yeah, measurement. Why not set up a KPI in your business so you're reporting, on a monthly basis, profit, sales, whatever. How many threat reports have been submitted through the organization?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Set a target and try to hit it.
Yeah. And I think this goes hand in hand with any testing that you might do, with services such as KnowBe4. If these emails, these tests are being sent out, are they being reported? If not, then you can measure that reporting and say, well, where in that lies the problem? Do users need further training? Do they need to be kept more up to date regularly? So it's a multi-pronged approach that you must deploy if you want to have that human side secured.
Yeah.
As it is on the technical end. So it's the same, but just applying it in a very different way. I'd say we are probably more complex than the technical things that are there to configure.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone, on today's call is intrigued and wants to sort of find out more about building a human firewall but needs some help, absolutely, please reach out to the team. We haven't got time to answer questions live.
Just one
Yeah,
quick
sorry.
question, Rich,
Yeah.
because someone said, so for the red team
Okay.
exercise, only senior executives would be aware, or the senior IT person, and generally there will be no warning. There'll be a testing period that we establish, and testing will take place within that period, be it 1 month or 2 months, and it has to be a realistic cyber attack simulation.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And if any other questions have been asked today, we will answer them and provide responses to those questions when we send out the slides from today's session and in the coming days. In the meantime, if you have any specific questions on anything that the panel said today or commented on, please feel free to contact us all direct. Our email addresses are on the screen, and they will also be included in the slides that get sent out. So thank you very much. Apologies that we've run over slightly today, but some important subjects, and sometimes with this sort of fluid approach, we don't quite know which rabbit holes we're going down. And so yeah, but thank you so much to both of you, Bob and Paris, today. Hopefully we'll see you again soon. Paris, I know you'll be with me and with Maritz on the 29th of February. So we're going to be talking about Cyber Essentials certification and how that can prove that your organization takes security seriously. That session is going to kick off at 10 a.m. As per normal. Paris, it'd be really useful, I think, just very briefly to explain what Cyber Essentials is so that people can decide whether this is a session that they'd like to join.
Yeah, so Cyber Essentials is a government scheme that's backed by the National Cybersecurity Centre, and we're one of the certification bodies that provides certification for this scheme, and it touches on the very basic controls an organization should have in place. So it's looking at the technical side of things and non-technical as well, but not so in depth as we've spoken about today. But it will be looking at firewalls on the technical end, secure configuration of your services, user access control, which touches on technical and the non-technical side of things. So how you give users privileges and the joiners, movers, leavers, onboarding, offboarding, malware protection, and also patch management. So looking at how you manage your IT estate. Are you updating your vulnerability, your software and applications to make sure there are no vulnerabilities in that? So there's 5 control areas, which will be a self-assessment question. And then we also look at Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a independent verification of these controls. So 2 certifications there.
Yeah, and I'm very, very likely that and it's increasingly the case that if you're part of a supply chain, which I'm sure that everyone on today's webinar will be part of a supply chain, that you will be asked to prove your cybersecurity standards. And likely that Cyber Essentials certification will be what you're asked to achieve and demonstrate. So that could be a really useful session. So we'll see everybody on the 29th. Many thanks again to today's panel and to all of you for joining us today. Again, apologies that we run over slightly. Hopefully we'll see you on the 29th of February, but for now, many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.